Welcome back for our last panel of the day. It's great to be involved in what the platform has to offer and see so many familiar faces from this morning. All the content from today will be available to view on demand within 24 to 48 hours, so don't worry if you missed something earlier. Let's start our afternoon with a discussion focusing on supporting freight growth. Rail freight is currently taking 7 million lorries off our roads each year, saving around 1.4 million tonnes of CO2 emissions. With the correct incentives and infrastructures in place, the environmental benefits of rail freight could double. Rail freight has proved to be a reliable, sustainable source of transit for supply chains throughout the pandemic. Capacity for rail freight services is currently severely constrained, so we must ask the question, are we utilising the full benefits of rail freight when it comes to achieving net zero? And is there strong enough economic and environmental value in freight running on underutilised passenger services? Well, here to help me answer these questions and more are Maggie Simpson, Director General Rail Freight Group, Jonathan Chatfield, Head of Policy, Freight and Stations of the Rail Delivery Group, Richard Moody, Head of Strategic Planning, Freight and Network Strategy at Network Rail, and Ed Wilson, Programme Director, Freight Reform at Great British Railways Transition Team. Remember, this is your last opportunity to ask any questions you may have of our panellists and help me make it a full conversation. So if you have a question, don't be shy. Please use our live Q&A function, which you'll find on the right-hand side of your screen. So good afternoon to my panellists. It's lovely to see a full house to kick the afternoon off. At the beginning of the William Shapps plan, the rail minister says that freight is often forgotten. Maggie, let's kick off with you. Is there a danger that freight could be forgotten?
Well, thank you, Helen. Great question, and pleasure to be here on the panel this afternoon. I mean, I think, it's the job of myself and colleagues on the call today to make sure that freight isn't forgotten as this important rail reform is taken. I think what I've seen in the last 2-3 years is that the awareness across the importance of moving higher, whether that's been because of the shortages that we've seen in toys and petrol, and whether it's because the way that freight kept moving for them during the lockdowns, delivery door, and what the sort of the perception of freight, knowledge of freight is now extending through not only the public as well, whether in Whitehall or in Scotland or elsewhere. So it really is a bit of a goal, I think, to have the profile of freight and that's it, to help some of the challenges that we have in that road.
Jonathan, how has freight delivered during the pandemic?
Yeah, and I think just echoing what Maggie has said, really, it really has stepped up and achieved a huge amount over the last 2 years. And I think it's absolutely right at the start of this conversation to kind of pay tribute to all the people that have actually really kind of kept working throughout lockdowns, throughout all of the kind of difficulties that we've had over the last couple of years. And certainly the way in which freight has bounced back in terms of the levels and has kept moving, as Maggie says, those essential deliveries, often medical supplies, often things going to supermarkets. When you see a freight train trundling past and it's just a whole load of containers, you have no idea, what is in those containers. But it is, so many of the products that we rely on. And as we'll be discussing this afternoon, it's got, I think, a really important and great future ahead of it as we head towards 2050. It's absolutely vital that we get the right framework in place to both build on the successes that we've had in recent years and actually grow towards 2050 with more modal shift and really playing its part in terms of the whole decarbonisation agenda, which I'm sure we'll come on to.
We certainly will. And you're so right. When you see freight trains sort of, as a sort of mere mortal, a member of the public, you don't really think about what's inside there or how many of the things that we use every day are delivered by freight. It certainly does need championing. Richard, I do love a statistic, and I stole these from your website. There are more than 600 freight trains running on the UK network every single day, with around 50 of these trains running in Scotland, delivering goods 24 hours a day. More than 4 million tonnes of product was transported by rail in the last 12 months, travelling more than 1,155,000 net tonne miles. In your opinion, how crucial and important is freight?
Oh, absolutely. It's just extremely crucial to society in general, from both the environmental benefits and and keeping our roads clearer of HGVs. So it's important. I think what will be really key is how we can continue the success and grow it, and as you stated earlier, more than double the current levels today to work towards 2050.
Well, of course, growth is important, and you've led me nicely on there to Ed. Ed, in the Plan for Rail, the government committed to developing a growth target for rail freight. How will a growth target make a difference, do you think?
I think it'll make a massive difference. Today, around 9.5% of freight in the UK is moved by rail on land. You compare that to comparable railways in Europe, that's quite a lot more, around 16, 17%. And the value that rail freight brings to the economy, it could do so much more to deliver for net zero. I think by having a growth target, we create for our sector and for the logistics sector as a whole, our North Star, the thing that we are collectively driving towards. And so everything that we do, from our investment decisions to our operations, to our service specifications, our R&D strategy, whatever it is there to simply deliver year on year, decade by decade, the growth targets to achieve net zero by 2050.
We'll come on to net zero and climate change, etc., in a moment. But Maggie, where are the opportunities for freight growth, do you think, perhaps in the next 5 years?
So I think that there are huge opportunities. So as outlined, share is only around 10%, but we know that within certain commodity groups we do far more. So we move almost half the stone and aggregate, for example, coming by train, but in other cities we know that market share. There are some really obvious to do more of the things we already know we can do well. So stone and cement in cities, intermodal shipping containers from are dominant around the big ports, so Southampton, London, but we've got lower shares from some of the regional ports, which are busier and busier and busier. So do that. But also there are really parts of supply chains that we don't do enough in. So domestic trunking, the kind of lorries that go up and down the motorway, hour by hour, day by day, moving between regions of the UK and Wales, where we have a growing market presence, but still, you know, a considerable part of that market which could convert. And the express freight, we're looking at starting fairly soon. That is moving smaller consignments of parcels, goods, letters, online retail and so on, but moving smaller consignments in converted passenger trains and getting those products up and running as well, which, you know, in terms probably doesn't look like very much, but in value to society is really high. So there's places definitely do more of the same, and there's places where there are huge new opportunities ahead.
And what about the forecast, Richard, for the next 25 to 30 years in terms of freight growth?
So I think the forecast, the growth is, we've had some research done on this, and it's going to at least double out towards 2050, and possibly could grow even further depending on what rail is asked to do to help the wider transport sector in decarbonising the surface transport as a whole. So that's what 600 trains a day mentioned earlier. Easily could be 1,200, if not more. If we put all the right things in place, the right policies, the right levers, the right incentives, and create the conditions to be able to deliver that. It is achievable, but it needs a lot of things to align and a lot of willingness to happen. And I think having a growth target helps, as it was described, the North Star to focus on will definitely help achieve that.
With ambitions, Jonathan, there always come challenges and obstacles. And what do you see as the obstacles to increasing rail freight?
I mean, there were a number of things that we need to be aware of. Obviously, it is a mixed traffic railway at the moment with passenger and freight services running. So getting that right balance between freight services and passenger services is really important. And that will vary, of course, around the country. If you're on a sort of direct route to Southampton or to Felixstowe or whatever, then one would expect that actually giving the right amount of capacity to freight is really important. You know, there'll be other parts of the country where there's a different balance, and also it can vary on time of day, and it can vary in that respect. So getting the right balance between freight and passenger, and part of that is understanding then the value that each brings. We did a piece of work through Deloitte only recently, which showed the economic value of being sort of around £2.5 billion coming from the rail freight sector. And then we wanted to drill down into that to really look at kind of individual trains and paths. And we've got some more work still to do on that. But that's very much about helping to get the right balance between passenger and freight services so that you can then target the right investment and things like the strategic freight network that a lot of time and effort has been put into looking at where the real sort of obstacles are. And we need to make sure that investment carries on and I would say increases at the real kind of pinch points. And then you've got the whole question of electrification, which again, we might talk about. I think there's a question that's come in already on that, but that will, I think, be really significant in terms of helping to increase the amount that rail freight is playing in that decarbonisation space.
Well, I think you'll keep an eye like I am on the questions. And in fact, Jonathan, I was just going to say that Stevens sent one in. Can freight growth lead to electrification of the whole network? Electrification is the only means of decarbonising freight trains and is a ready technology. So lines carrying both significant freight and passenger must be wired. Can this, along with operating cost reduction inherent with it, electrification, I think electric traction rather, be used to lever treasury inertia into action? Long question there from Steve. Carry on with that, Jonathan, as you are sort of along those lines.
Yeah, sure. And I'm sure my colleagues will want to come in as well. But certainly I would start by saying that, you know, rail freight plays a significant part in decarbonisation just through modal shift to start with. So, you know, we need to remember that, you know, when you see a freight train, it's taken around 76 lorries off the road, and that will have had a significant impact on reducing emissions. But I think going a stage further than that, further than modal shift as an argument, I think it is absolutely vital that we electrify more of the network. And some of that is not huge number of kilometres, miles of electrification. You know, there's some infill electrification that we talk about, little bits of the network that could actually, if they were electrified, really significantly shift the dial from diesel to electric. So absolutely a steady progression of electrification year after year, so that you're not having the peaks and troughs of electrification, which is absolutely the worst thing for the supply chain and for the cost of you know, what you need is a standard kind of level playing field year by year of electrification, whereby the supply chain and everyone can actually, you know, gear up and be ready to deliver that. And we're nowhere near where we need to be at the moment. We're electrifying probably less than half at the moment per year of what we need to be. So that has to be a fundamental priority. We have to get beyond the words and the talking and actually deliver those
to the actions
on the ground.
Ed, do you want to come in there? Jonathan's thoughts there?
Yeah, sure. I was going to actually reference all of the three in what they've said. So Maggie's talked about the opportunity within domestic trunking, and Richard mentioned creating the right conditions for growth, and Jonathan's talked about creating a network. And I really wanted to kind of reference one of the white paper commitments around strategic rail freight interchanges. And so what is a strategic rail freight interchange? Well, the idea was that there would be a network across the country of rail connected logistics parks with large complexes of warehouses that would essentially allow for that domestic trunking by rail all the way around the country. And for a number of reasons, there's been a bit of a challenge there in the development of these facilities. Most of them have been built within the Midlands, stretching into South Yorkshire and Oxfordshire, but nowhere else really, not to a great extent. And so we have quite a large swathe of the country that is very underserved by the right facilities. So we don't really have a proper network of facilities all the way across the country to enable that domestic trunking by rail as effectively as we could. Now, part of that's been driven by the value of warehousing offsetting the infrastructure, the rail infrastructure investment, and that's a bit more challenging in some areas than it is in the Midlands area. But one of the objectives of the transition team over the next year is to explore many of the underserved areas of the country and how we can really create a proper network of intermodal facilities to really drive that growth and grow within the domestic trunking market.
Maggie, is that music to your ears to hear that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the point here is partnership. So in order to make a real success of that growth, we need the rail network to be effective. We need it to work with the logistics industry to understand where and for that warehousing or those bulk facilities that's unmet today. Because if we don't align the railway with the demands of the logistics industry, we fail before we've even started. We have the world's best railway system, but it has to resonate for its customers. So it's about finding the logistics network where people are looking for new facilities, get those new facilities into the rail network, and then when we do, we reduce the cost of business because we economic together growth that we're looking for.
Can we just explore the role that freight can play in decarbonising transport in the UK? We mentioned it in the introduction. I mean, Maggie, can you kick us off on that?
Yeah, so I think we Jonathan and Richard have already alluded to the fact that right now today it's really important that we make less carbon. People fixate on 2050, but we wait that long. So even today, when the network is not as electrified as we would like it to be, the 76% less carbon, more on some routes, by using rail freight today. So the pressure is on from our customers. They want to do more by rail today because their boardrooms are under pressure on sustainability, quite correctly, and that means that we need to improve our own sustainability, and that's why Johnson talks about that infill electrification, why people are looking at alternative fuels to be sourced at EO. We're pushing really hard for trains, which are more carbon efficient than short trains. So right now, to save that carbon today is vital, but we've also got to work on that long-term plan because net zero 2050 is everyone. There's not a part of our economy that hasn't got to achieve that. So that is that electrification, of course. Motives that go with that, and in business, that private sector, sector investment, motives will be really important, and there's a huge role to play in making sure that rail, whether that's in what's in law or whether it's in the role of the rail regulator or in the duties that GBR will be on, have the right levers to support that investment.
Richard, I'm interested to know what progress you're making at Network Rail and also how freight can play a role in the wider decarbonisation agenda.
So rail is only 2% of all surface transport carbon emissions. So rail is green, fairly green already. And it's that I describe it as a 3-step approach of how rail helps transport decarbonise as a whole. First of all, we need that modal shift, which we need to do today, even if it is using diesel locomotives. That is still up to 76% less carbon emitting than HGVs. And once we've enabling more modal shift, we need to focus on the small infill electrification, as Jonathan touched on earlier, where we can make better use of the electric locomotives that exist. And then once we get through that we can then consider the wider electrification of the network and where the biggest carbon reductions could be done. But in doing so, we need to make sure it's all sort of sequenced well, so the freight operators can get to the position of ensuring if they need new locomotives of electric or multi-mode capability, they've got time to procure those. So we don't have the infrastructure ready and they can't use it. Or another thing is they go and procure stuff and the infrastructure is not ready. So it's a whole system-wide industry joined up approach which needs to happen. Within Network Rail, we've done the traction decarbonisation network strategy, which looks at what are the options to the network. But we need to consider how that plays out in terms of the wider economy and the pressures Treasury will be under in making decisions. But there's lots of great stuff happening already. So there's the introduction of biofuels, which we're seeing a significant carbon reduction today for the existing locomotives. So the industry is moving ahead with decarbonising rail, but also it's really helping the wider transport issue.
We've just got a question from Rajani. In what scenarios do you see rail freight decarbonisation achieved by other sources of energy like hydrogen and other alternate fuels? Is that something perhaps, Ed, would you be able to tackle that?
Actually, I'm going to ask whether Richard could, as part of your traction decarb.
Go on then.
Yeah, so I think from a freight perspective, so hydrogen and battery definitely have a place to play in rail. In the freight space, I think they are more in the space of the first and last mile of journeys, so within freight terminals and yards, particularly if there's overhead lines, it makes then loading freight trains a little bit more complicated. In terms of mainline operation, where the technology is today, I don't necessarily think battery or hydrogen is the solution for mainline freight operations. But technology can change. It comes on leaps and bounds. So we need to sort of constantly keep one eye on how that technology develops. But battery and hydrogen will likely play a part in the sort of first and last mile of a freight train's journey.
Take another question. Please volunteer if you want to answer this one. It's from Jason. We've heard a lot in the news lately about containers being stuck in ports. Several reasons, but one continually cited is a shortage of HGV drivers. How can we speed up the process of finding new paths for freight trains and source locos, drivers and wagons so that goods can be moved more quickly?
Because, you know, it is a complicated out there at the moment, there's no doubt about it. And, you know, I've been on calls all week with people who are working flat out to make sure that, you know, goods are being moved effectively and efficiently around the country. And there's all sorts of issues. There are problems with getting empty containers back out the country. There are problems with the ports. Somebody today is full of garden furniture and lawnmowers that didn't get sold in the summer because we were coming out of a lockdown, and you know, and things like that. So that it's a very complicated. And rail freight have as many containers inland and empty containers back out as they can. But challenging as a particular shortage of HGV in the Midlands. That's meaning the containers out of the last mile. So there are real things people have, you know, been innovating. There's been 2 new services started recently from the Port of Liverpool, trying to both move goods inland but also release road drivers to do other things. Terminals, trains are running extra services at weekend at the moment where they can to try and, you know, relieve the pressure. And people are working really hard to try and do as many container movements as they can. But I think it's fair to say that everybody is being touched by the issue, and we're certainly not in that as well.
Jonathan, I'm just wondering what you see as the benefits that are achieved through that modal shift from road to rail.
Yeah, so I think there are huge benefits that come from that modal shift. I mean, we talk about, you said you like a statistic, so, you know, when you look at a passenger train, it can probably have taken 500 cars off the roads. I think we've said already, when you see a freight train, it can have taken 76 lorries off the roads. And if you think about that in terms of the emissions that you're then saving, but also the congestion, that, you know, clearly is going to be an issue, particularly in the years to come. So there's issues around emissions, there's issues around congestion as well, and those are huge benefits that come from that modal shift from one to the other. And we talked about electrification as being a key part of the decarbonisation. I mean, I think there are other things as well. There's getting the right research and development, which we're already making, you know, good progress on, but I think there is more that can be done, and that can cover things around timetable development and the way in which we do our capacity planning and timetabling, finding the right paths and making those paths as efficient as they can be. That's really important. And then there's a lot on the people side. There's the skills, there's the jobs, there's the future sort of people issues as well. And with that comes, you know, ability to innovate and be more entrepreneurial than maybe we have been in the past. So there is a lot more we can do, but I think we're already making good progress down a number of those routes, and we need to just press on because the climate crisis is here and it's very urgent.
Yeah. Paper establishing a national freight coordination railways. What will your team, you know, as program director of reform, what will your team be doing?
A lot. So our single objective is about growth. Single objective. So there are lots of things that we'll be doing in different areas to essentially deliver that growth target. And so in mobilizing the team, everything from making better decisions holistically across passenger and freight, looking to Jonathan's value of rail freight report there, and bringing that thinking more into everyday decision making within GBR in the future will be huge to support growth. Our general infrastructure investment program, whether it be in terminals, property, or network, as we continue forward, our R&D strategy as well, providing growth. But we will be recruiting for soon a new market development team to support the operating companies in bringing new businesses to rail. We need more diversity. We need more diversity in terms of customer base, and we need to bring those businesses that aren't using rail to the railway. And some of that is a very long-term focus and long-term effort into redesigning many businesses' supply chains and working with them to attract them to the railway. And so we'll be recruiting for this team very shortly. So many of you on this event today might be interested. And so we will commence that shortly, and hopefully there's some very talented people out there that would like to come and work in our team and help us grow and enable rail freight into the future.
Lovely. Yeah. Maggie, I'm curious to know, what will the locomotive of the future look like, and how can the industry deliver this?
Yes, I mean, Richard's talked about this a little bit more. I think, you know, we're all guilty of that sort of generation where we had Maggie Philbin on the TV at night, didn't we, telling us what the future looked like, and it was taxing rights and heaven only knows. And so perhaps it'll be something like that. But I think, you know, 29 years actually isn't really very far away. It sounds like it, but, you know, we've got a fleet of 500 to 700 locomotives that need to be replaced on a commercial cycle. That's, you know, a decade or two of it looking at are available enough to develop in the future. And I think, you know, Richard talks about multi-mode locomotives and bi-mode maybe. So, you know, my expectation is that the locomotives that people will buy in the next wave, whenever that comes, will probably be overhead electric and diesel bi-modes. And then you would hope that if that technology does develop, and, you know, today we know that hydrogen fuel cells don't have enough power to haul mainline one day, and then we can substitute and replace the diesel from that, or maybe it'll be a rocket pack, who knows. But I think it is an evolving picture, but we have to remember that this, and people aren't going to invest in something that isn't proven technology, really.
Jonathan, will reform of the rail industry help rail freight, do you think?
Yes, I do, and it has to, doesn't it? So I think, you know, many of us that have been in the industry for a long time have seen a lot of change over that time, and this is another significant period of change that we're going to be going through. But absolutely, we need to be focused on the outcomes, focus on the end goal, as each of us have talked about. And I think there is a huge amount of joint work and collaboration that goes on across the industry at the moment. And I think this reform process has to make sure that that continues and gets better and better. There will be some, risks along the way, and we need to certainly track and make sure that that is continuing. But I think absolutely this reform process, we need to put in that long-term certainty and stability that's needed for investment, and that investment can then come from both public and private sector. And it's absolutely important that we kind of stay focused on what it is we're trying to achieve and work effectively together.
No pressure, Richard, but you're not only going to get the last word of this panel, but the last word of our day. So think carefully. How optimistic are you that rail freight will continue to be valued, it won't be forgotten, and that it'll play a central role in the future vision for a sustainable railway?
So I think it will be successful. The level of success will depend on the work. My fellow guests on this call are the work they do, and all of us working together to try and enable that, along with the many stakeholders who exist in the freight sector, as well as government bodies as well. I think the success can be there. We need to change our way of thinking, be a bit more innovative and not afraid of change. But I truly believe with everybody's will and the reform team will drive forward, we should be able to achieve the success.
Yeah, collaboration is key, isn't it? And it's great to have your voices, all of you on the panel today, really important and valuable voices when we're talking about this subject. So massive thanks for being with us. It's been great. I can't believe how quickly 30 minutes has gone by on freight. I still feel I had a lot more to ask, but let's save that for the next time. So a massive thank you to my panelists for a fourth and final interesting debate. I hope you found that useful and as fascinating as I did. With that, we do draw to a close on a fantastic day of guests and delegates networking across our RTM 365 platform. We've covered a breadth of challenges, opportunities, and solutions as we've engaged with the topic of net zero rail. I'd like to thank all of our speakers and panelists today who've taken the time out to share their expertise and insights. As mentioned throughout, all of today's content will be available to view on demand within the platform at your leisure within the next 24 to 48 hours. And remember, our networking tools do remain open year round, which is great because it gives you an ever-growing community of registered innovators, including you. I'd like to thank you, our audience, too, for taking the time out to listen and learn and for taking part in our discussions today. If you're a winner in our gamification challenge, the RTM team will be in touch to discuss your prize options. Separate to gamification, today's event, as I mentioned at the beginning of today, was CPD certified, with 1 CPD point earned for every hour of live content watched. We'll collate this information and distribute CPD certificates. Before we go, I'd like to extend a special thank you to our events team behind the scenes at Rail Technology magazine, who have helped put this event together. And from me and everyone at RTM 365, thank you for attending today and giving us your time and attention. Have a great rest of the day. See you again soon, hopefully at our next event, Regional Investment, which takes place on December the 9th. Perhaps bring your colleagues too. Bye for now.